lot in the modern media is dependent on theories about influencing people through language. So here's a small video about that. Usually, or the way I look at it, and I used to study neuroscience, is that animals in the animal kingdom basically go through life under immense stress, always trying to fight or flee or run for cover or look for food. There's really not an easy life for most animals. And in their mind, they have basically context that find themselves in, and then certain actions that they are able to do. And usually it's just walking or eating or biting or something very simple primitive actions. And they need a motivation to do that. And if they do something, any animal that does something takes a risk. You know, you can have this squirrel that sticks his head in a cup and then it gets stuck and it will die, or you know, there's so many risks for animals, it's unbelievable. So usually if they do something, the motivation they have to do something is because it's very necessary, because they're being chased, they're running like crazy and they dive into a hole, or it's very appealing. That's basically that's the inbred super motivators like sex. It's involuntarily, so they fall, or it's an accident, or and that's the strongest one, it's just more peaceful to have done what they do. And they have an image in their mind, and their mind is not stable until they do what they think should be done. It's like completing a puzzle. The act is completing a puzzle towards an image of a future that is more peaceful for the brain. Brain is usually out of balance, either by coincidence or by emotions or by its own learning. And because it's out of balance, we are doing all kinds of actions to get it in balance. That's one of the theories. But all these factors are pretty much coincidental, because most animals do not really they have territorial knowledge, they know where stuff is, and of course the intelligence of different animals varies widely. You know, your rooks can be very smart, beavers can be very smart, dolphins can be very smart. So of course they do have, let's say, contextual knowledge, which they remember when they're in a context, and they can build upon their actions. So it's not really like they're uninformed. But the basic drive they usually have is very much one that is primitive and driven by necessity. Now, in our language type of human mind, it's completely different, because apart from our emotional responses and our direct actions, because of course what we do ultimately is what we do is not very complex with our hands and with our feet and when we move. It's not that intricate. Language is an exception. It's a big exception. And what language does and can do is put a different context over our current context, and we can get addicted to it and believe in it, and that can basically almost put a lock on the way that we behave in certain situations, because instead of the direct perceived context that we see, which would drive us to certain actions, we basically live in a defined context, in a language defined context, which depends on whether we name what we experience correctly. And then we have those verbal and auditory type of representations suggest actions and liberate our brain to do certain things. And of course then it really depends on what's the emotional connotation of certain words, so that we find ourselves in enough motivation to actually act towards certain goals. That's what language can do. And that gives a completely different picture to the way that we behave as opposed to animals.